Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we are going to begin a new director fest with Yasujirô Ozu. We're going to start with his 1959 film, Floating Weeds.
Let's dive on in. Alright everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see /hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the places and spaces that people what?
Find good media, that's right. Follow us on all the platforms. We're biggest on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. So follow us there. So a new festival, new director, Yasujirô Ozu.
Yeah, or that's as close as we're probably going to get, so live with it.
We're gonna stick with the easy Ozu, I think, through the remainder of this festival. Yes. But just so we're not jumbling our words too much, but someone that I think I've kind of maybe seen in the periphery before, maybe heard the name before, see his name in Criterion Collection stuff, pretty much all of his stuff.
Yeah.
And a director from the 50s, basically post-war Japanese director. Obviously, I don't really have a ton of exposure. This was the only movie of his you have seen.
Yes.
He definitely has a very certain style that he shoots with. There's many directors I could see stealing stuff from him, from Wes Anderson to, I don't know, even like Wong Kar-wai or Kurosawa. Obviously, it's very similar.
I think I've seen some stuff that Spike Jonze has done that looks very much like it. Sure. And I think that it's
all about the camera not moving.
It's about the camera not moving, and it's also about composition of scenes and really playing with depth, and I think playing with height. Apparently, there is an Ozu-style tripod that he had to specifically build because in most of his shots, in particular in his later color work, like Floating Weeds, the camera's like 2 feet off the ground. So it's like the camera's so low, but to create a sense that's very... what he wanted to have be very natural to what the human eye would see, right? It's very much like when we are looking at a shot, we don't have these big sweeping vistas. We have these, tight mid shots where people are cut off on the top or sometimes the bottom, and even his close-ups aren't very close-up. I think it's very naturalistic, but it's
interesting.
It's super stylized without seeming stylized.
Yeah,
so often.
I'm watching it in HD and it looks beautiful. It's stunning.
I mean, the opening shot here in Floating Weeds with the lighthouse and the bottle,
a couple different
just takes your breath away.
and it's a couple different angles of it too, which is kind of interesting. So and honestly, there's not really like any exposition or B-roll or anything. That outside shot is pretty much the only time you're outside. Like 90% of this movie is inside or shot inside someone's home, like you said, with the depth and everything. And traditionally in film school or whenever you're doing camera, if they're teaching you how to shoot and you want to make somebody more the hero, you shoot them from below, right?
Yeah, so give a sense of power or lack thereof.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's interesting that he did that for everything, but there's so much here that is going on just with framing, right?
Yep.
That's why I'm guessing he doesn't move his camera, is because he works too hard on all the shit that is inside the frame, which is why I say Wong Kar-wai, because some of his framing shots, he doesn't move the camera a lot either, and there's a lot going on, a lot playing with depth or so on and so forth.
And similar that we said with Wong Kar-wai's festival that we just recently did is that sometimes you'll be looking at a shot for what might be 30, 40 seconds before you realize, oh, there's a fuzziness around the outside because we're actually in another room looking into this room, and you're like, you didn't have to do that, but it adds an extra layer of sort of coziness. And I'd love to talk about these establishing shots that you're talking about, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the things, and Roger Ebert, I believe it was Roger Ebert that coined this term of pillow shots, right? And that they come from these sort of pillowy words in traditional Japanese poetry, and that those pillow words in poetry were used to sort of create a broad stroke of an image or a feeling, right? And that Ozu does that in his movies by allowing people to talk and produce an idea. Two people are talking, something is said and it's sort of like that thing that's said is left to linger in the room, and then we cut away and we see the banners floating in the breeze. And to your point of it not being an establishing shot, we might not even be near that house that shot is of, right? It's like, that's incidental. It's the Ozu's trying to evoke a feeling within us to just like leave us in this space. And he does such a magnificent job of doing that.
I think he does an amazing job of it. And especially, I mean, you're very much a fly on the wall in all of this, right? I
Completely.
mean, which you are in most movies, but here especially because you get these long takes with a lot of action going on with that depth of field. And, but like just the little town that he creates reminded me of like the town in Seven Samurai, right? Like,
oh, completely.
Like it was just like, it's kind of the only place in the world, right? You don't think about the outside world. You're just there. You're in their world, that place. Even though they talk about going places and doing other things outside of there, but it just kind of felt like that. And the cultural traditions, especially opposite of American traditions and stuff like that, are so different. And the cultural expectations and societal norms, especially in the 50s, where I don't assume there was a lot of family drama movies going on back then, which is probably why he's an auteur from that country. But the more I'm learning about him, very, very interesting, very beautiful. I love some of the characters. The storylines here do remind me of something like that you would have to kind of think about and sit with in the 50s. He's going to make you think and wonder why they're doing things. I think ultimately, a lot of this is kind of post World War II.
Yes.
Huge. They even slip in a Chinese nut joke in there. I'm like, Japan and China don't like each other.
Yeah. What the hell's a Chinese nut?
And then they're like, oh, it's a peanut.
It does.
Yeah,
it's
like,
okay.
But that was like very intentional, I saw. But I think a lot of it is just kind of analyzing the kind of what I assume the old guard views as the breakdown of a conventional Japanese family, right?
And from my reading and us doing this festival, I've read that that's a lot of what his filmography is really examining that stuff, which again reminds me of something like, and we'll talk about this more in our next episode when we do early summer, but that's very much reminiscent of something like the Ice Storm, right? Like Ang Lee's work in talking about sort of like the breakdown of these traditions. And here there's a lot of traditions. We have, like you mentioned, this little seaside town, and this group of actors are coming through this. Yeah, Kabuki show is coming through with their acting troupe.
It's like a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And like right from the very beginning when they're hanging the posters up, and I love the one guy in the coffee shop's like, I preferred the strip show from last week.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, if there's only one show coming through town and you're just some Joe Schmo hanging out at the bar, you're like, I don't care about seeing a Kabuki show. I want another strip show.
Sure, yeah.
But, we have Komajiro, who is the troop leader.
The master.
The master, yeah. And he's coming with his girlfriend, Sumiko. And then we have a whole bunch of other players. And we meet some of the other players kind of first. I love this one guy who's one of the sort of side characters, who's just the second that the ship comes into port, man, he's out looking for Strange.
Oh yeah.
He's like, okay, who am I gonna have sex with, right? And I love what a great name drop when the woman's like, you're an actor, what's your name? And he's like, Toshiro Mifune. Oh, yeah. Right, like right out of the gates. I was like, that's really funny. That's a great joke.
I caught that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. But and all of the other guys too, all the other actors, like pretty quickly are trying to find their sort of comfort
for
women
sure.
that they're going to be hanging out with while they're there.
For sure. I mean, after they get done promoting this thing all around town, it also allows them to see all the ladies around town. And then, even after their first show, they're all, even though some of them are dressing up like ladies, are peeking out like, which one are you going to go for tonight? And
the one guy who hasn't done any of the work is like, where's mine? And they're like, oh, it's her, and it's the girl that nobody likes because her teeth are kind of wild.
Yeah.
And you're just like, but I love that he's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, and that ends up not just being kind of a fun comic relief. It is in the moment, but it actually has a lot of symbolic resonance to the other part of the story that's going on, which is that Komajuro visits his old mistress, who now has an adult son that is Komajiro's son, but the son doesn't know that, thinks that
Komajiro
he's
does,
just the
so,
uncle.
yeah.
And that the whole reason behind why he doesn't want to tell him is because, you know, there's, again, we are living in a post-war Japan, but the caste system still very much exists in terms of like what people can do and can't do, right? And if you're traveling actors, like you're kind of low class, like, and it's funny because they're low class, but this woman, who is the Oyoshi, who is the ex mistress that's the mother of his son. She's basically just like a farm woman. It's not like she's high class, but the even being that is more high class than being like a group of traveling actors.
For sure. And we got to realize too, like when they're in these troops, they try and stay at a place as long as they can, right? Whether it's a year or longer or less, you know, and they've been doing this for years and years. So yeah, it's like a sailor, you know, right? Just
you're
port
always
to port.
Yeah, port to port. Exactly, port to port.
So, you know, I'm sure, you know, there's some estranged children out there over time with these actors, especially when all of them are so horny in this new group.
That's what I'm saying, is it suddenly turns like the kind of lighthearted, like, yeah, you're going to try and get some from one of these ladies here, into like, yeah, look, here's what happens.
It's true.
Here's what happens. Like you have this like adult son.
It's a good contrast.
That you are totally estranged from, that you want to be more honest with, and you know you can't.
His little group of dudes, though, is pretty funny. And obviously you mentioned his girlfriend as well. But yeah, they kind of give each other shit. I love his sense of humor, though. Like, he has a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
And that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting with these movies. So, you know, I'm excited to kind of see more and see if he gets funnier or if it's just kind of like a subtle jab. But, you know, a lot of it is, you know, he has this playful music throughout, which is a little different than I was expecting. And he does have this relationship, and he's really excited about his son because he's a stand-up kid. He's going to school. Like, he has a job,
go off to college,
all this stuff, but he can't, you know, it's kind of too late. He kind of wants to make up for lost time.
But he also is kind of, his hands are tight because like he doesn't want to tell him that he's his dad because it's so interesting. Like the Komajiro as a character is so fascinating here because he's proud of the work that he does and he's proud of his group, and you can tell he loves all of the fellow actors so much. But he also is like, it's like he's never really willing to be honest about anything. He's not willing to be honest with his son. He's not willing to be honest with himself that he should be proud at what he does. Instead, he's like,
good point.
He is like, no, I'm like a lowlife, right? Yeah. And you're like, why wouldn't you have pride in the thing that you're doing? You know.
And another thing he's not honest about is telling his girlfriend what's going on.
Yeah, like, that he has a son. That
like, I feel like, you know, if you explained yourself, you know, and again, I don't know cultural norms back then, and it could be embarrassing or something, but she, you know, a lot of this movie is based on her jealousy of this relationship going on.
Yeah.
And you would normally think it would because of the other woman, but she doesn't really seem to have interest in him. They just are happy to share a son together.
Yeah.
It's kind of a co-parent thing rather than like, oh, I want to live with you or anything.
Yeah. Again, as we've talked about in lots of movies recently, the sort of stunted growth of a man who should totally be more in charge of his emotions, and the woman who understands that about him and just puts up with him. And that's exactly who Yoshi is that she's just like, I know, I'm glad you're back in town, bud. Yeah, you know, and you have your new mistress with you.
Yeah,
you know,
and
like
Sumiko gets completely jealous, and they really kind of start treating each other poorly, and it changes their relationship. And yeah, to me, it's just be honest. There's nothing to be jealous of here. I'm just trying to fulfill this relationship. But we get this amazing shot of them arguing in the rain.
Oh my!
But it's from across each other.
Yeah,
and they're like degrading each other constantly and yelling at each other,
calling each other losers,
basically
and whores,
out of jealousy.
Like,
and it's a really powerful scene. But don't forget what you're watching and how fucking awesome it looks too.
It's an incredible, and I was in reading, I read a couple of other reviews of this movie, and I noticed this. after also watching Early Summer, is that they were like, you know, other than these pillow shots of transitions where again it's a static camera looking at nature, those are really the only moments that have a lot of an actual score happening in it, and that when we cut back to characters talking, it's almost all non-diegetic sounds. It's all almost just like always background noise, and that's completely true in the scene that you're talking about. It's just spellbinding, that rain, and that they felt they're right there next to each other on opposite sides of this little cobblestone street, and they might as well be on two sides of the ocean, right? That's the way the rain feels as it's coming down off of those tin roofs on either side of them, and they're just shouting at each other and just berating each other. And there was something about it that felt very like her, Sumiko's misunderstanding, and then Komajiro's like unwillingness to be honest, or even to feel like that he needed to be honest, felt so Shakespearean to me. It felt very much like what Shakespeare does when he's writing, where he's like, well, we need to show, I can't be nuanced. We need to show exactly what this kind of a person is like. So they're going to be stubborn and pigheaded, and that's what's going to create the conflict. And it's interesting because that's very true for this movie, and I'll be interested to see if it's true for the rest of his movies in the festival, because I doubt it. There's something about this that again feels very much like a Shakespeare play almost in that way.
Yeah, I could see
of it's like the misunderstanding has to then become like the crux of all the problems, and where all of the melodrama comes from. And obviously that's true here, because what Sumiko ends up doing then is that she reaches out to one of the younger actresses in the troupe, Keo, and basically is like, hey, I think you're really cute. I want to see if you can seduce this kid from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do you think about why she did that? Why did she do that?
I mean, it's out of pure jealousy to let him, let Koshijiro know that she can have some control here. Like infiltrating on his business. He doesn't want her in on his business, and even when he tells her, she still is kind of cutthroaty.
Yeah.
Right.
I know, and I'm like, part of it feels vindictive, and then another part of it kind of feels
he's playing chess with his son. He beats him. They go fishing, all this stuff. He knows he's getting closer to him, and don't fuck with my baby is basically what's going on, I think.
Yeah, but there's this secondary level where I was like, it's very skillful and it's very insidious, because if Sumiko can make this work and Keo does start a relationship with his son, him being like, you can't do that is like a double layer of having to admit this societal disconnect, like this societal, like, oh, well, these actors can't be with like good people, good normal people who want to go to college, right? So it's almost like he has to double down on like admitting like, oh, we are lowly, because it doesn't ever seem like that he says that to his troupe, right? He's never like, we're a bunch of dirtbags.
That was never like obvious to me, the classism as much. Like obviously there's levels of things and jobs that are seen, but like it was such a small town, and everyone seemed so excited to have them there. They were almost like famous, you know, because they were these actors, and kabuki was a big form of entertainment.
Totally, right? But I mean, that's part of what I think is the weirdest kind of contradiction about him, is that he does both. Like he's like, yes,
I mean, he is an actor.
I'm proud of, yeah, that's true. Like, I'm proud of this work, but also like my son can never know this because he needs to be like a good boy who like goes off to college and makes something of himself.
It's how he sees himself. Yeah.
Yeah. But but like, it's definitely also how he sees the other actors in the group, because that's part of the reason why he's so mad that, I keep forgetting her name, that Keo is dating his son. I mean, part of it is because he knows that she's the one, Sumiko's the one that put him up to it.
He's slapping him around at some point.
Well, can we talk about that moment right there? Because that is like, there is a thing that happens that I've now noticed that might be an Ozu trope, that if it is like going to be so fascinating to me. The first one is we never see a full play.
It's true.
That the troupe puts on.
We never see the theater manager either. That never shows up, right?
Yep.
That's a big villain in this whole thing.
We never see him. The little bits of the play we do see, like later, Komajuro's son is giving him like acting critiques.
Yeah.
And Komajuro's like, don't talk to me about acting.
No, he's actually giving him good
He's giving him
feedback.
great critiques, but what's interesting is all of that stuff, whatever the like bad acting was, we as the audience never saw. We didn't see any of it, right? And it made me realize Ozu picks very odd things to either show us or not show us.
It's behind the
And he
scenes.
does it over and over again because, all right, there's that one where you're like, yeah, it would have seemed important to show the dad acting to then see the son critiquing it, but he decides not to do that.
Yeah.
On the flip side, Ozu does something I've never seen a director do. We are at the most ratcheted up moment that we've been waiting for and dreading, which is Komajuro sees his son with KO.
Mm-hmm. Like down the street.
Down the street. And he goes back into, this is like the backstage area of where the play happens. And they have all the tapestries and everything's kind of folded up and sitting there. And he's just steaming, right? KO comes back and he starts tossing her around and he's like, go get Sumiko right now, right? And he kind of slaps her a couple times and we're like, oh shit. And so she leaves. I would say any other director would follow KO out and get the reaction of Sumiko finding out, oh shit, it's happened.
Yeah.
And instead, Ozu sits in the room.
Interesting, yeah.
He sits in the room. We see Komajuro sit down and he looks up at a light and it cuts away from him to the light and the moths going around the light and it's silent. And, Komajuro isn't seething. He isn't like cracking his knuckles and getting ready to have this. He just is sort of sitting. And I remember sitting and going, what the hell is going through that guy's mind right now? And I was like, I've never seen a movie do that. That at a moment of its most ratcheted up tension of this big conflict,
kind of kept it where you wanted it to stay, though. Yeah. Like you wanted to stay with him, right?
You do, but like, I've never seen anything like that before. Like it blew my mind. I was like, why did we stay in the room and have it be quiet and just watching him sit with his thoughts?
And also, Kiyoshi and Kaio actually fall in love too.
Yeah, it's real.
That's
it's
another
not...
part of it too. Is like they're both good looking, like whatever class of people. Like
that seduction scene is another one where Ozu removes something from us, which is when she's given him that big come on after she invites him to meet back over at her place, and they're in that long hallway.
Yeah.
And his face is totally black in shadow. And it's this very like sultry moment between the two of them, but you have no idea what's going on in his mind. And I was like, that's brilliant. Because normally we would want to see his eyes. We'd want to see, is he buying this? Does he think he's being manipulated? Is he falling for this girl? And instead his face is completely hidden in shadow. And I was like, what a wild motivation. It's such an interesting way to manipulate the feelings of the audience in that particular way.
Yeah, that's obviously so far his camera work has really stood out as just outstanding. You can see why it's a Criterion thing over and over. I'm really excited to see the rest of it. Getting back to this, Komajiro finally realizes too little too late to kind of be the father figure, right? And does end up telling his son who he is. Yeah. And gets not the reaction you would expect.
No, it's a little, it's kind of the worst possible moment to do it.
It really is. And they come back with a baby, which they don't mention, but they are holding the whole time.
Again.
Did you see that?
I did. I know. And this is another thing where I'm like, well, who knows what may have been left out that Ozu's like, it's not important. This shot, this moment's really important, right?
Yeah.
But it is, I think that the two of them actually falling in love, it's such an important part of the growth for our Komajuro's character to realize that like he can't, like, you don't get to have any agency for your son.
Yeah.
You've been uninvolved in his life the entire time.
And I have and he very easily could have pulled this card. Like, I know what it is like to be a father now, and I would never leave my son. So
Totally.
I want my dad to stay dead, basically, is what he says.
Yeah, and it's incredibly rough, but it's also like and that's happening at the same time as there's this brilliant moment where a bunch of the actors are like, man, the last show sucked. I think we should get out of here. And they're like,
is that the
we
on
should
the
still,
beach?
yeah. No, this is after the beach scene's amazing.
It's
This
so
is
good.
This is after the beach when they're all sitting around drinking and
when they know it's like going downhill.
Yeah, and they're like, we should just take the money and run. And the one actor's like, how dare you?
Yeah.
I will be loyal
Yep.
till the day I die. And then he's the one who steals all the money and runs off. And again, we don't see the scene. We just see the aftermath after he makes his declaration of loyalty
Yep.
to the master. And then he's the only one not in the next scene when they're all talking about what's been stolen. And I was like, again, I
didn't put that together.
It's so brilliant because I was like, that's hilarious.
I do love the scene though after they kind of know it's done and they're all sitting around and kind of, I don't know, being nostalgic about their careers.
You're talking about like it's a wake, like it's a funeral. Yeah,
like this, we could never be like this together again. Whatever, Great movie. Love the movie. It was excellent. I didn't really know what to expect other than beautiful cinematography, and I definitely got that. But the story and everything and the acting was all there and fun.
It's really nuanced. It has a lot of nuance in it. The last thing I'll say is like, there's this shot, and it's when Keiyo and Kiyoshi, who is Komojuro's son, when they're very first kind of getting to know each other and they go down to the beach and they're leaning up against these two boats. And it is one of the most gorgeous shots I've ever seen in a movie, period, full stop. Like,
wow.
It's the way, the color of the water behind those boats, the color of the boats, the color of the rocks, the way that it's framed. And I was just like, what was the budget for this movie? Because like, were those boats just there? And Ozu was like, hey,
let's point it that way.
We should go shoot this scene over there by those boats. Like, I don't know, because I'm like, it's perfect. It's like, there are so many shots in this movie that you could just frame and hang up on the wall.
Well, it's like, it's like something Miyazaki would just create by painting it.
Exactly. And you're like, and so, but again, like budget wise, I'm like, so did they build the boats? Did they bring them in from another town and set them up like that? Were they just sitting there?
I'm guessing that was just part of the atmosphere, but who knows?
It is. Every shot looks like a little miniature. It looks like this beautiful little encapsulated, again, we talked about Wes Anderson or some of these other directors where it does seem just like,
everything's perfect in its own place.
Yeah, but I don't know, like back then,
if
that was the town and they were like, here's where we'll shoot, and
probably
it's just about the way that he holds the camera, because you're right, they look like doll houses. They're just, it's perfect.
Last thing I'll say is they do kind of end up back together at the train station at the end with Sumiko. And they kind of just see each other like, oh, okay, that's convenient.
Yeah.
So it seemed a little convenient. I was kind of surprised he gave her another chance, but also neither of them had anywhere to go.
That's the thing. Well, I think that's why I think
it's like
having
a Midnight Cowboy. You're like,
yeah, dude, or The Graduate, or any other movie where you're just like, because you're right that there's like, what's what I love that it was at the train station and that neither one of them, she seems a little bit happier because she has some place to go, but he seems miserable. And I love that they left that wound open, right? I mean, you do get the feeling, I mean, maybe not to the degree of like, say when we did The Big Sick and we were like, oh, it ends on a positive enough note that we have a good feeling that the family's probably gonna be okay. This definitely felt like they need to do a lot more work, but you're like, that's not anything that the son won't be able to get over.
That's
and
another story.
You know what I mean? It is another story, but I like that it was like, it was still a little messy, and it did feel a little bit like, well, fuck, neither one of us have anything better to do.
Basically.
Which is like, again, I think that's a little bit of a dose of realism for a 1950s film. Like, that's a little bit more realistic than I would have thought.
maybe, or it was a little too convenient.
Could be either one. I guess if it was too convenient, though, then it would be like, oh, I do love you, right? And that's how it would have ended.
I forgive you for everything.
Yes, for everything.
All right. Well, next week we are going to do that one scene for a Christmas scene. We're doing Die Hard.
Yes.
But we'll continue our Ozu Fest after that with, what are we doing? Early summer?
Early summer, yes.
All right. And then continue. Please follow along, like, and subscribe. All the spaces and places, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok are our most active channels. So please join us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, you guys.